Hi there. Okay, let's do it over here. Maybe this will be better. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to reading Rousseau Social Contract. Once again, we are now returning to Book 4. And today we'll look at chapters 1 through 3. I hope we're planning on at least. So then, the first introduction. Now, this Book 4. I mean, we have to remember the social contract is really kind of what Rousseau does. Is kind of he takes his projected work, political institutions, his project, his book that he worked on, was going to work on and hoped to do. But it became when he realized it was beyond his intentions. What he did was he cannibalized it. And social, I mean, the Geneva manuscript is the first element of it. And this, what we have in the social contract, the published aspect of the Geneva contract, is the body embodiment of what he took to make it. In many ways, his book four, is kind of like his fleshing out of took what he expanded on and I mean, this is where he took things he wrote before, put them in his new thing, and then built on it. Okay, the examination here starts with the question of the theme of governments again, going back, as he says in the although we go back to the introduction, the continuing the discuss. It's a continuation. The 9 chapters we'll get here are a continuation of the discussion of political laws and the ways one to strengthen the constitution of the state. So therefore, the question of strengthening the various constitution that is done for the state. And as you remember, the constitution structure will be the frame by which the government is established, so that the relationship between the government and the sovereign, and which again is the people and the sovereign are the same entity. So therefore, you have the government to the people. So the sovereign and people are going to be like there's two poles of it, as ruler and subject, right? And then the government is the agent, the material agent of of a representative of the sovereign that will direct itself towards the people. That's the whole. So in the Constitution, there's nothing more than the frame by which government is, right? The type of government, the form of government in that sense, right? So here we're going to be looking at the continuation of this theme in that sense. So look at chapter 1, that the general will is indestructible. This idea that the general will. Remember what the general will is. The general will is it is the willing of the sovereign. Okay, it's the sovereign will, and given the sovereign is the all the collected members of the body politic. Um, construct. In other words, they're constructed. That all the individuals who construct and create the body politic and the forming of the social contract create and their will, their collective will. It's a collective will. Is the general will. That's what it means. That's what general means. General will means the overall will of the sovereign. Okay, and he says that is indestructible because if it exists, then the state exists. So therefore, this is what instruct. So as long as several men together consider themselves to be a single body, they have only a single will, which relates to their common preservation and their general welfare. So that as long as in other words, this is important. That once the people see themselves as one, as a people, the idea here is a people. Like the idea here is a people in a body. In other words, this echoes the general idea of Hobbes that it's an, that the state is an artificial. It is a body. It is a body, artificial body, and therefore, like a body, the individual body cannot have multiple wills. Okay, if it does, that's an unhealthy body. It's an unstable body. It's a schizophrenic body, right? That the healthy body, the healthy man, will have a unified will, and that his unified will, if he's operating for his utility and his interest, would seek his health and well-being, right? This is that idea, and Rousseau wants to make the same thing for the social entity. That the social, as long as the people, he says, as long as several men consider themselves a single body, they will have a single will, which relates to their common preservation and their general welfare. So it's not this. Remember, this is tied to the idea again. This is a collective good. The collective good is is our living together as a community. It's our and this is and therefore our collective good. Therefore, since this is a benefit, this is good for us. This is something that we benefit from and we need in order so that we can pursue our individual goods in that sense. But this good is, in fact, without that, this common good, this common benefit of living together, we cannot seek our individual private interests. Our individual private interests are completely unsecure, unsafe, and have no basis in safety and security or our ability to enjoy it. So Rousseau wants to make this point about this is why it relates to the common preservation and the general welfare. There's, maybe the preamble to the Constitution, right? The preamble to the Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are, not truths, we the people in the United States, in order to form a perfect union, right? To establish justice and domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, that is what? The preservation, right? General tranquility and common defense is all about preservation, right? And then what is that? And to secure the general common defense and to secure the general welfare, and then for the blessings of liberty, right? That famous line. So therefore, let's look at this in that sense. Then all the mechanisms of the state are vigorous and simple, right? Then all the mechanisms of the state are vigorous and simple. Its maxims are clear and numerous. It has no tangled contradictory interests. The good is completely apparent everywhere and only requires good sense to be perceived. So as long as the people see themselves as a single, as a common body, a single people, and as a single people, they have this common and this strong interest. And therefore, what he says that okay, in that situation, the mechanisms of the state are vigorous and simple. They don't need because you have people who see that this is important to us, that our security and our general welfare depends on this, right? And that therefore, what there is, the maxims are clear and numerous. Everyone understands it, and there's no tangled or contradictory interests. The common good is clearly apparent everywhere and requires only good sense to perceive it. Peace, union, and equality are enemies of political subtleties. Therefore, this is subtleties. In other words, peace, unity, and equality are enemies of political subtleties. Upright and simple men are hard to fool because of their simplicity. Traps and refined pretexts do not deceive them. They are not even clever enough to be duped. When among the happiest people of the world, groups of peasants are seen deciding the affairs of state under an oak tree and always acting wisely, can one help scorning the refinement of other nations, which makes themselves illustrious and miserable with so much art and misery, mastery, misery. Now, note 111. Compare the bucolic image with the description of the early Swiss as good and just without ever knowing what justice and virtue are, and the constitutional project for Corsica, right? And Neufchel's mountainside this picture of the letters to D'Ambert, and Rousseau's assertion of the social contract that takes Geneva as a model of political institutions, the little Écrits de la Montagne, letters to the and arguments of the remainder of this chapter with the assertion that the general will is always constant, unalterable, and pure, follows from the conception set forth in Book 1, Chapter 6, and Book 2, Chapter 4. This idea of this idea here is of simple people, simple, not too aspect. Now, some people may argue peasants are not good. His idea that the peasant is doing this. No, the peasant is not going to do this. The peasant doesn't have a. This is where someone like Jefferson, or maybe even listen, saying, "Hey, peasants, does it? What you're saying? You're speaking here of the yeoman who owns the property, who has a property interest, who owns the farm, who the peasant who doesn't own the farm has no utility in that sense, and it's too short sighted. Whereas the owner of the farm is going to, the yeoman in this sense is going to have more means to it, and therefore it's going to be a different situation. His perception here is the bucolic perception of the peasant in the countryside being simple, right? Again, this emphasizes the distrust of money and commerce. And this kind of does lead to an anti-commercial animus in Rousseau, and also anti-urban animus in Rousseau that kind of reveals itself. But it's one, while the ancient Greeks would favor the anti-commercial aspect, it wouldn't necessarily favor the anti-urban aspect because the city is the unity of what makes the polis possible, right? The urban center, the market, these things create the center of which the city as a political entity forms. Let's continue. A state governed in this way needs very few laws, and to the degree that it becomes necessary to promulgate new ones, this necessity is universally seen. The first to propose them, merely states what everyone has already felt, and there is no question of intrigues or nor of eloquence to pass into laws, what each has already resolved to do, as he is he is sure that the others will do likewise. So therefore, this idea that in a state with this, a state governed in this way, of this with not too much luxury, not too much things. Um, in other words, peace, unity, and equality are enemies of political subsidy. He says upright men want, doesn't need traps, doesn't need these things. In other words, simple men, simple things. They have simple. Everything's clear. There's no need to make these things. They don't propagate. The state needs very few laws because, and to the degree that it necessary to new ones, this necessity is everyone sees it, right? He says everyone knows what they are. Everyone here sees it. They have the same interests. They have the same goals. They don't really have a contrary interest divide, and because of this, everyone has the same opinions and beliefs about these things. So there's no intrigue. It is not a question of intrigues or eloquence. Everything is obvious in a sense because it's simple, right? What misleads reasoners who only see states that have been badly constituted from the beginning is that they're struck by the impossibility of maintaining similar orders in such states. In other words, okay, what's problem is because they look at states that have been too large, too big, and therefore badly constructed, badly formed, badly structured, in other words, not done the way it would ideally be done or best done for things, but rather been badly done. And upon being badly done in a condition you could not do these good things, right? You cannot, because there's no common interest that the people have no. There is not the people don't share a common interest. That private interests are the factions of private interests are just too powerful because the people don't see themselves as one or a common people or sharing a common interest. And therefore they see the impossibility of this simple order, right? This order, right? He says they laugh when they imagine all the nonsense that a clever swindler or an insinuating talker could put over on the people of Paris and London. So again, this is the thing. They laugh and imagine at how a good talker and a swindler can con the masses. The masses. The masses are not the scene that he portrays above. The scene he portrays is not about a mass society. It's about a community, a people who, an organic community, a people rounded in a place and with a need. They don't have luxury. They don't have excess. They are able to survive and maintain. They're more agricultural in that sense, that they're tied to the land. They're not an urban mass. Okay, the urban mass can be do it. And he continues, right? They don't know that Cromwell would have been condemned to hard labor by the people of Bern, or the Duke de Beaufort, sentenced to the reformatories. So his metaphor here is Geneva. Geneva is seen as an alternative, that Bern and Geneva are kind of more moderate things. There's not a mass. They're not a mass like big Paris with hundreds of thousands and tens, hundreds of thousands, London and 250, big populations. No, that these are smaller things, more manageable things, and the people are more homogeneous in that sense. In this sense, um, um, but when the social ties begin to slacken and the state grows weak, when private interests start to make themselves felt in smaller societies, to influence larger ones, the common interest changes and is faced with opponents. Unanimity no longer prevails in the votes. The general will is no longer the will of all. Contradictions and debates arise, and the best advice is not accepted without dispute. So, in other words, he's saying, what happens? Well, as and I think this is the problem here. He says that the social ties that held everyone together slacken, and the power of the government grows weak. Because why? Because, well, if you continue the older government and this population grows size, it's very unable to be effective in that sense, right? So private interests start to make themselves feel felt. Because why? There's no longer the common ties that held people together, and instead of one society, you have smaller societies all seeking to influence the larger society, right? And therefore, what happens is the common interest, what was common, no longer is common. It changes, and it's faced with opponents. In other words, these private parties, these various collective interests that emerge, localized societies of a shared interest, who no longer share a common interest, right? This is the breakdown. And therefore, the unanimity no longer prevails in the votes. And what happens is the general will is no longer the will of all. And therefore, this is, because the interests are tied to localized interests are prevailed, there's going to be contradictions and debates arise. And what happens is nothing is, in the best advice, what is best for the body, the collective, is not going to be accepted without disputes. Finally, when the state runs close to ruin, continues, in other words, finally, when the state, close to its ruin, continues to subsist only in the illusory, ineffectual forms, when the social bond is broken in all hearts, when the basis interest brazenly adopts the sacred name of the public good, and the general will becomes mute, guided by secret motives, are no more citizens in offering their opinion, and no more citizens in offering their opinions than if the state had ever existed. And iniquitous decrees, whose only goal is private interest, are falsely passed under the name of laws. So, in this, what happens here? The state is broken, it's not really working, it's ineffectual. The social bonds that were in hearts are no longer looking at raising their localized interest, and what is really secretly brazen private interest, names, calls itself the public good, and the general will is silent, guided by secret motives, that citizens no longer offer their opinions, in this sense that then if the state had ever existed, right? And he says, and decrees whose only goal is private interest are passed in the name of laws. Passed under the name of laws. Remember, laws are always supposed to be, decrees are always what? Decrees are always private acts of a private act, an individual act. A decree is a government actor makes a decree that deals with something. This is different than a law. A law always reflects general law. So decrees are interpreted as laws. Again, this is what Schmidt, in his Legitimacy and Legality, said was happening in the time of Weimar, the Constitution in 1920, late 1920s, 1920s and 30s. the 1920s. What happened was the jurisprudence equated decrees with laws, right? And this is what he said, that's dangerous. This violates. They're not the same thing. Does it follow from this that the general will is annihilated, corrupted? No. It is always constant, unalterable, and pure. But it is subordinate to others that prevail over it. So he's saying that there is a, as long as he says that it's there, and in itself, the general will is present. It is what? It is saying that it is constant, unalterable, and pure, but it is subordinate to those who prevail to it. It's not annihilated or corrupted. It doesn't get annihilated or corrupted. It is just overwhelmed. It is overwhelmed. It's made subordinate, right? Each person detaching his interest from the common interest sees perfectly well that he cannot completely separate himself from it. But his share of the public misfortune seems like nothing to him compared to the exclusive good that he claims he is getting. So, therefore, in other words, this idea that the public, in other words, the public misfortune, the negatives, in other words, his private good is so high, his perception of his private good or utility is so high, versus what the cost he is in. In other words, the disaster of the public system, the common benefit, the loss of it, the cost of it is not perceived as, in other words, strong enough for him that he or the actor sees it as the benefit. The benefit I'm getting from my private interest still outweighs the cost of what the loss of the public. Okay. In other words, again, repeat this: is his share in the public misfortune seems like nothing to him compared to the exclusive good he's claiming he's getting. With the exception of this private good, he wants the general good in his own interests just as vigorously as anyone else. So he still wants the general good that's in his interest as everyone else. Even in selling his vote for money, he doesn't extinguish the general will within himself. He just evades it. So, in other words, when I sell my general vote, I get bought. I'm being bought to buy their vote. You're not extinguishing the general will. You are what? You're just. He's saying it's you're what is it? Evading your responsibility. Right? The mistake he makes is to change the state of the question and to answer something other than what he is asked. Okay? In other words, the mistake he makes is to change the state of the question. What is the good? What is the public good? And answer something other than he's asked. So rather than saying that his vote is advantageous to the state, he says it is advantageous to a given man or to a given party for a given motion to pass. So is what is being done advantageous to us all? To the state, which is us all, everyone. Or by saying what? He says that is, in other words, rather than saying the vote is advantageous to us all, the state, hence all of us, commonly, us all, he says that it's advantageous to a given man or to a given party for a given motion to pass. Thus, the law of public order in assemblies is not so much to maintain the general will therein as it is to be sure that it is always questions and that it always answers. In other words, thus the law in public order, thus the law of public orders in assembly is not so much to maintain the general will therein as it is to be sure that it is always questioned, the law is questioned, and that it always answers. Okay, what the general will answers, right? It is question and answer. Is this the general will? And the general, it is not to maintain it. In other words, he says, again, the law of public order in assemblies is not to maintain the general will, keep it, but rather it should be question and answer. Right? I could make many comments here about the simple right to vote in every act of sovereignty, a right that nothing can take away from the citizen, and on the right to give an opinion, to make propositions, to analyze, to discuss, which the government is always very careful to allow in its members. But and let's look at this footnote 112. I might get my glasses. Sorry, I need to get my glasses. I'm old, right? Well, Rousseau's ironical defense of free speech has confused some editors who reads the clause as a serious attempt of principle. Such interpretation is likely given in the next chapter and book, as well in book two and chapter book two, as book two chapter in the next chapter. In other words, interpretation is unlikely given in the next chapter, as well as what he said in book two, chapter 3. Right? This is not free speech in this sense. This is raising the problem. He says, but this important subject would require a separate treatise, and I cannot say anything more on this one. It's all right. So he's not going to say. In other words, this comment here, I can say right about the vote, these things. I could say a lot about this, but this is a separate issue, separate treatise. I won't say this. Now, chapter 2, voting. Okay, wait a minute. But he said he's not going to talk about it. Okay, right? Right? See, right to vote. I could say right about to give a right. In other words, I could make comments here about simple right to vote and every sovereign right. He said I'm not going to talk about it, right? But then he guys talk about voting. It can be seen from the preceding chapter that the way in which general matters are handled can provide a rather precise indication of the current state of the mores and health of body politics. In other words, that if everyone cares more about private interest over the shared interest, this is when it's unhealthy. The mores are bad. If the mores are people concerned about private interest over the collective interest, that they're concerned with their wealth and their individual benefit more than the cost. In other words, the benefit of the collective entity and its survival, then this is the current state of mores and the health of the body politic. The mores, there's a connection here. The mores of the people, are they corrupted or are they healthy? If they're corrupted, then the body politic will be corrupted. The health of the body politic will be corrupted. If the current state of the mores are bad and are not good, then the health of the body politics will be bad, not good, most likely, right? The more harmony there is in the assemblies, that is, the closer opinion becomes to obtaining unanimous support, the more dominant as well is the general will. So the more people agree, there's more consensus. This idea, in other words, there's more in a society where there's consensus. There is health. Here, if there's too much contestation, then there's not health. If the private wills can't agree, and there's not this, so consensus requires health. Well, this is a very interesting point he makes here. And as the closer they come to obtaining unanimous support, the more dominant as well as the general will. But long debates, dissensions, and tumults indicates the ascensions of private interests and the decline of the state. So the more contentious. So this is the thing. You get this idea of but this is where I would argue that the Greek political life like contention. This is where Machiavelli will say, no, Mister, no. This idea of unanimity is misleading, and actually, in fact, that's a weak state, right? That the healthy state is when there is contestation, because only in debate in these things that, therefore, we can obtain the conflict of the dispute, that which we can then get. We could try consensus. But consensus is going to be rare, and that will require too much luck. Small communities, and that small communities cannot survive against bigger ones. So you're going to be forced into bigger societies. Therefore, you're going to be forced into having contestation, and then Therefore, the management of contestation, something that Rousseau thinks is this ignores, becomes the central part of Machiavellian politics in that sense, right? But this is seen as the rise of contestation and tumults indicate ascendance of private interest, mean the decline of the state. This this appears less evident than this appears less evident when two or more orders are part of the constitution, like the patricians and the plebes in Rome, whose quarrels often disturb the commonwealth even in its finest period, the republic. But this exception is more apparent than real, for then, by the vice inherent in the body politic, there are, so to speak, two states in one. So therefore, this is not, in other words, that there's not, and actually, this is a anti-Machiavellian point, I think, in one sense, that that the Machiavelli sees this contestation between these two things as the health of the republic. As long as these two things were kind of balancing each other out, right? That one did not wipe the other one out, then the Roman Republic was healthy. It is when one dominates the other, then the Republic either dies, gets corrupted and dies, right? His argument is that no, there must be uniformity, right? That in other words, the quarrels even disturb the common, even the finest period of Rome. But this exception is more apparent than real. For then, by the vice inherent in the body politic, there are, so to speak, two states in one. What is not true of the two together is true of each of them separately. So therefore, this is the idea that it was not true together. The two cities are not unified, but together they are unified, right? Each of them separately. And in fact, even the stormiest times, the plebiscites of the people, when the Senate did not interfere with them, always passed calmly and by a vast majority of votes, since the citizens had only one interest and the people only one will. So therefore, you understand the Senate and the people are separate. The Senate and the senatorial class versus the nobles versus the people, the plebes, and the patricians and plebes, right? These two parts, and that these were two cities in one. He argues, and that amongst themselves there's unanimity in that sense, right? Since the citizens had only one interest, the people had only one will. And the other extreme, unanimity returns. That is, when the citizens fallen into servitude no longer have freedom or will, they fear and fretfully turn voting into acclamations. Men no longer deliberate, they adore or they curse. Such was the abject manners in which the Senate expressed its opinion under the emperors. Sometimes this was done with a ridiculous precaution. Tacitus notes that under Otto, the senators, while violently denouncing Vitellius, took pains to make a terrific noise at the same time, so if by chance he became the master, he would be unable to know what each of them had said, right? So therefore, in other words, they whacked it against him, but in case but they made so much noise, they couldn't know what each of them said in that sense. From these various considerations arise the maxims that should regulate how votes are counted and opinions compared, depending on whether the general will is more or less easy to know, and the state, more or less declining. Okay, so this is the way votes. In other words, we need to have regulations. There needs to be, from these considerations of these things, you need to know how votes are going to be held, how you're going to handle votes, right? Because there is only one law that, by its nature, requires unanimous consent. That is the social compact. For civil association, it is the most voluntary act in the world. Since every man is born free and master of himself, no one, under any pretext whatever, can subject him without his consent. To decide that the son of a slave is born a slave is to decide that he is not born a man. If therefore at the time of the social compact some are opposed to it, their opposition does not invalidate the contract. It merely prevents them from being included within it. They are foreigners among citizens. Once the state is instituted, consent is implied by residence. So, in other words, the original contract is enact. And even if I don't agree to it, well, that doesn't mean that all those who agree to it will form the body, and those who agree to it will be outside of it, right? That's the original social contract. It doesn't nullify it. It only just means that, okay, you're not going to be in it. And what? And then what happens is that then once in that, right, uh, 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 um, uh, the foreigner, they are foreigners, right, outside of it. But however, once in the state is instituted, consent implied by residence. To inhabit the territory means to submit oneself to sovereignty. Now, this is asterisk one here, down here. This should always be understood to refer to a free state, because elsewhere, an inhabitant can be kept in the country against his will by family, goods, the lack of place of refuge, necessary, or violence, and then his sojourn alone no longer presupposes his consent to the contract or to the violation of the contract. In other words, there could be external reason, because everywhere inhabitants can be kept in the country against his will by these things, and we don't know whether this is by his goods, families, in the lack of place of refuge, right? Necessity or violence, right? And then therefore, then his sojourn alone does not presuppose his consent to this or the violation of the contract. It does, in other words, in that sense. So we have to understand this. You have to understand here that this only applies to free states, states that are not properly done as states but are despotic in character. People are being held against their will. They'd flee, but they can't flee. Except for this primitive contract, the vote of majority always obligates all the others. So therefore, in society, then once the society would just stay, in other words, if you don't like it, leave. It's that Merle Haggard, love it or is it, what is that, fighting side of me? Merle Haggard's 1960 song "Fighting Side of Me," where he says, "If you disagree, if you don't like what the majority says, then either obey, agree, be silent, obey, or leave. Love it or leave it." Right? Oh, but stay and make it better. No, you're enemy. You're violating the con. You either have to admit. In other words, the second you say, "I disagree," and I'm going to fight you on this and contest this, then you're not a good citizen in Rousseau's view. In other words, in other words, you're concerned more with your private will and your private decision than the good of the society. If the goal is the good of the society and make a decision, your opinion is this, but the majority says this, then you have to obey the majority. That's the problem. This is the majority. This is why majority. Unless you accept contestation is that always contestation is going to happen. A contestationalist understanding of this. There's no room for in that there's never going to be consensus, because unless you have in other words, unless everyone's interests are unified, and once you have a society that does not have a unitary interest, and you want to maintain it, then in other words, pluralist models require contestation. The idea that you have to accept toleration is not okay. Then that becomes oppressive if you do it that way. So I have to be very careful here. Rousseau is very problematic, right? The primitive contract requires that in other words, this is the majority always obligates all the others. This is the consequence of the contract itself. But it is asked how a man can be free and forced to conform to wills that are not his own, right? How can the opponents be free yet subjects to the laws that they have not consented? Now he goes, well, I reply that the question is badly put. The citizens consent to all the laws, even those that are passed against his will, and even to those that punish him when he dares violate one of them. The constant will of all the members of the state is the general will, which makes them citizens and free. So in other words, this idea the constant will is what makes the general will. The constant will of all of the members of the state is the general will, which makes them citizens and free. Now, in Genoa, the word libertas can be read in the front of prisons and on convicts' chains and galleys. This application of the motto is noble and just. Indeed, it is only evildoers of all class who prevent the citizens from being free. In a country where all such men are in a gallery is the most perfect freedom would be enjoyed. In other words, when bad men, people who, in other words, what are bad men? People who instead of obeying the law, do seek their private will above the law, break the law, and therefore only by ensuring that such men are in chains. The law is supreme. What the law is what the majority says it is. So either you accept and obey, or you leave, or you rebel and find yourself in chains. Right? That's very important to understand. There's reference here that makes them free. Therefore, by obeying the law, by obeying the law, you are free. You're only free when you are obeying the law, and therefore you're complying with the general will. When a law is proposed in the assembly of the people, what they're being asked is not precisely whether they approve or reject the proposal, but whether it does or does not conform to the general wills that is theirs. So therefore, when you vote on anything, it's not as whether you agree or not agree with the proposal. His argument is that whether is this what you think, is this what the general will is? Is this the general will? And yes, private people will make their perception. This is the problem. Each one expresses his opinion on this by voting, and the declaration of the general will is drawn from counting all the votes. Therefore, when the opinion contrary to mine prevails, that proves nothing except that I was mistaken, and what I thought to be the general will was not. My private will, if my private will had prevailed, I would have done something other than what I wanted. In other words, his argument, the psychology here is what he's saying. It is then I would not have been free. Right? This is that weird, and this is 115. I'll read this thing here. The foregoing passage deserves particular emphasis since it reinforces the interpretation of general will as the logic implicit in the principle of majority rule. Note, however, that for Rousseau, popular votes should not be viewed as expression of differing interests, compared to the distinction between the general will and the will of all, based on the notion that the agreement of all interest is formed by the opposition to the interest of each one. This is this is book 2, chapter 3, in Rousseau's first note. Compare editorial notes number. I see that. So again, this is this idea here. This what he says here about this is what is this about? This is that the private. In other words, remember the psychology here. That the psychology here is, well, you're asking me, is this proposition? It's not I agree or disagree with this proposition. Is this proposition what the general will what the general will thinks should be done, or is this in accordance with the general will? And it's that my answer is yes or no, and that if now the majority decides what is right here, then if I said I gave the wrong answer, then I would have been. If I gave the answer, the minority answer, then I was simply wrong. What the general will was on this issue. And it'd be better, and I should obey what the general will wants. Right? They said the idea that the general will is ultimately the good that is therefore your good, your supreme good in that sense. This presupposes it is true that all characteristics of the general will are still in the majority. In other words, all the characters are still in the majority. In other words, that the majority must make what the general will was. Okay, when they cease to be, there is no longer any freedom regardless of what side one takes. So, in other words, if the majority does not, if the majority is really not voting, not making their decision on what is the general will, but rather their private will, their collective private will, then it's it's no longer there's no freedom at all. In other words, freedom only exists if there's a general will in a sense, and that people are able, and that will is predominating. Okay, that if private will overcomes private will overcomes the public will, the general will in that sense, right? Then this is this is unfreedom. This is a pace of my will. This is despotism. This is one person's will imposing it upon another person's will. Where the law is the collective will. The law and the sovereign is the collective will of all who have formed the entity. It's not an imposition because all of us are in that will. And it's only a question of, again, this is the problem with using the language of will. Once we use the language of will, the people who disagree are mistaken, and if they insist on their mistaking, then they're ill, mentally ill. Okay? But there cannot be a healthy society. There cannot be people who can be wrong. You can, of course, you have the right to be wrong, but then you have to consider. But you insist that you're right, and you resist obeying. Then either you should leave the community, you should leave it in that sense, or if you keep on insisting that you're right, this is my community, this I'm right, and I'm right, then this is the dangerous. This is you're ill, and only way you can be, because you are a law. Given that now you're breaking the law by insisting on it, the only way that the society can be free is by you in chains. That's what Rousseau's teaching here. This is a very, we have to be careful here. This is where Rousseau, can be as much a, you can say, well, Rousseau's a radical leftist. Or it sounds like a radical leftist. No, this is both. You can see and hear the argument for someone like de Maistre or the authority. You can see this. You can see the origins of de Maistre's argument of authority here, implicit here in that sense. There is this argument. This is the doctrine of majority rule in the sense, right? But in showing earlier how private wills are substituted for the general will in public deliberations, I have sufficiently indicated the feasible means of preventing this abuse. I will discuss this again later. 116. Let's take a look at this. 116. This is compare Book 2, Chapter 3, Book 3, Chapters 13 to 14 and 18 with Book 4, Books 4 through 7. Right, so this is Book 4, Chapters 4 through 7. So later chapters, the Roman institutions, right? This idea of voting and these institutions that he gives. So let's turn again back to the text. With regard to the proportions of votes needed to declare this will, I have also given the principle on it which it should determine. The difference of a single vote breaks a tie. A single opponent destroys unanimity. But between unanimity and a tie, there are several qualified majorities, and any of which the proportion can be established according to the conditions needed of the body politic. So therefore, this idea, a single vote breaks a tie, the difference between a single vote breaking a tie and the unanimity, there's different proportional. In other words, he says there's qualified majorities. So more than this one vote tie, but proportional ties, right? And that proportions can be established according to the conditions and needs of the body politic. So what are the conditions? Two general maxims can serve to regulate these ratios. The ratios of the majorities, right? One that the more important and serious deliberation, the closer the winning opinion should be to unanimity. So you should have, in other words, it should be not just one person. It should not be simply simple majority. One person more than half, one person more than a tie, and unanimity. It should be closer to unanimity than to one person breaking the tie, right? That's the first principle. Should be more in unit, more towards that way than this way. So more towards consensus, right? This idea of consensus, right? It's not simple majority, but consensus. The closer the winning opinion should be to unanimity. The other, that the more speed the business at hand, the other, that the more speed the business at hand requires, the smaller the prescribed difference in the division of opinion should be. So in other words, the faster things are, the smaller the prescribed distance in the distance opinion be. So in other words, the things that require speed in the business at hand requires the smaller the prescribed differences. So therefore, there should be not big difference. Things that require speed, we should have much consensus on. This is the other is that the more speed the business at hand requires, the smaller the prescribed difference in the division should be. In deliberations that must be finished on the spot, a majority of a single vote. So therefore, in other words, in deliberation that must be quickly done, then one's deliberation. If it's emergency, crisis, you need to be do it, then one vote should do it. Okay? But things that don't necessarily, that one vote should suffice. At first, these maxims appear more suited to laws. At first, these maxims appear more suited to laws. The second to business matters, right? However, that may be in a combining of the two that establish the proper ratio of this. In other words, however it may be, it is a combination of these two. So therefore, the first thing is laws. The first maximum is that they should get consensus. You got to make laws, make discussion. And whereas a business matter, a decree that deals with a business matter, something like this, or something that is immediate concern, immediate thing, then therefore business matters, simple majority does enough. But in laws, we should do this. But he says, however that may be, a combination of these two is established the proper ratio of this. So some combination of this. Now, elections, number 3, chapter 3. With a view, and with regard to the elections of a prince and magistrate, which are, as I've said, complex acts, there are two ways to proceed, namely by choice and by drawing lots. So if I can, in other words, if we're going to choose a prince or magistrates, and the magistrates, leaders, executive, or the executive of magistrates, right? There's two ways you proceed. One by choice, a vote by choice, or by drawing lots. Both of these have been used by various republics, and they're very complicated, and a very complicated mixture of the two is still seen in our times in the election of the Doge of Venice. Right, this is how the Doge of Venice is dealing with this. In America, we still have lots. Lottery is done through juries. Remember, the power of life and death is still determined by, in American things, by the lottery. The election of juries are arbitrary entities that they're temporary bodies who are given ad hoc creation for the purpose to determine the question of innocence or guilt and sentence of life and death, right? And therefore, this is lottery in that sense, right? Voting by lot, says Montesquieu, is in the very nature of democracy. I agree. But why is this so? The lot, he continues, is a way of electing that offends no one. It provides each citizen with a reasonable hope of serving his homeland. Okay, this is 117. Again, this is Spirit of the Laws, Book 2, Chapter 2. Montesquieu goes on to add, however, that election by lot is defective by itself. and the remainder of the chapter or so seems to disagree in principle, but agree in practice. Right? This is what he goes on here. But now he says, but those aren't reasons. If it is carefully noted that the election of leaders is a function of government and not of sovereignty, it will be seen why the drawing of lots is more in the nature of a democracy, in which the administration is better to the extent that it acts are fewer in number. In other words, drawing by lots is more in the nature of a democracy, in which the administration is better to the extent that its acts are fewer in number. In other words, in a democracy, smaller scale community, there's going to be few things you need, few things offices. Its offices are going to be limited. Its function will be divided in a situation to do certain specific things. Therefore, it doesn't matter who will give it to in that sense, right? And therefore, it's better to the extent that its acts are fewer in number, right? Even in true democracy, the magistracy is not the magistracy is not an advantage, but a burdensome responsibility, which cannot fairly be placed on one individual rather than another. So this idea that the idea in a true democracy, this is a burden. You're putting someone a burden, and it's not it cannot be fairly placed on one private individual rather than another. The law alone cannot impose this responsibility on the one to whom it falls by law. For then, as the condition is equal to all, the choice is not dependent on any human will. There is no particular application that alters the universality of the law. So in other words, it's random. It's going to happen. It's going to be there. There's nothing that's going to be no particular application that alters this. Right? In an aristocracy, the prince chooses the prince. The prince chooses the prince. The government preserves itself, and it is there that voting is appropriate. For example, the election of the Doge confirms rather than destroys this distinction. The combined form is suited to a mixed government, for it is an error to mistake the government of Venice for a true aristocracy. Although the people there has no part in the government, the nobility itself is like the people. A multitude of poor Barbonites never came close to any magistracy, and all they get out of their nobility is the empty title, excellence, and the right to attend Grand Council. Since this Grand Council is numerous, as our General Council in Geneva, it's illustrious. Its illustrious members have no more privileges than our simple citizens. It is certain, discounting the extreme disparity of the two republics, that the Genevan bourgeoisie is exactly equivalent to the Venetian principate. Our natives and our inhabitants are equivalent to the bourgeoisie and the people of Venice, and of the people of Venice. Our peasants are equivalent to the subjects on the mainland. Finally, apart from its size, however, that republic is considered, its government is no more aristocratic than ours. The entire difference is that since we have no leaders for life, we do not have the same need to draw lots. We do not have the same need to draw lots. Because they have a leader from life, they have the need to draw lots in that sense. We don't have that. That's what both. In other words, that is that its government is no more aristocratic than ours, and that the difference is that that we have no leader for life, we do not have the same need to draw lots in that sense. Election by lot would not have many drawbacks in a true democracy, in which the choice would become most indifferent, since everything is equal in mores and talent, as well as in maximum fortunes. But I've already said that there's no true democracy, right? There's no true democracy. In other words, you cannot. There's going to be differences. There's going to be things like this in practice. In theory, it's a good idea, but there's no such thing as a true democracy in this sense, and therefore there's going to be differences in max as well as maxims and fortunes. In other words, there's going to be differences in mores, everything equal in mores and talent as well as maxims and fortune. Not the case, right? When choice and lot are combined, the former should fill the positions that require special talent, such as military function. So by choice, the former, the choice, should fill. Again, this is very much Aristotle. Aristotle agrees with this, right? Politics 4, in Politics 4, when this is discussed. The latter is suited to those to which good sense, justice, and integrity suffice. So therefore, lot should be when good sense, justice, and integrity, such as judicial responsibilities. Because in the well-constituted states, these qualities are common to all citizens. Okay, this is very much why in America the idea that citizens had lottery. Therefore, Rousseau kind of agrees with the Anglo-Saxon understanding of the British lot jury system in that sense, right? Echoing Rousseau, echoing Montesquieu here, I think, in that sense. Neither lot nor voting has any place in a monarchical government, right? So therefore, neither vote nor has any monarchical government, since the monarch is by right the sole prince and the unique magistrate. The choice of his lieutenants is his alone. When the Abbé de Saint-Péry suggested multiplying the consuls of the King of France and electing the members by ballot, he did not realize he was proposing to change the form of government. In other words, by doing this, you change the form of government from a monarchy to an aristocracy. This is 119. He goes, Rousseau refers to the Polissonnerie by Abbé de Saint-Pierre, 1718. The two had met just before the Abbé's death in 1743, and Rousseau was subsequently asked to edit an abridgment of his work. As a result, in 1761, Rousseau published the extract of the Project of Perpetual Peace by Monsieur the Abbé de Saint-Pierre. This is in the PAD, Volume 3, right? Although written in the same time, Rousseau's judgment on the Project of Perpetual Peace in that same volume, his edition of the Polissonnerie de Abbé de Saint-Pierre, and the judgment on the Polissonnerie, again in that same volume, page 69, were only published posthumously in 1782. The Abbé was a rationalist, if not utopian, who imagined a European Parliament as a means to universal peace, as well as sweeping reform of the French monarchy, to which Rousseau here refers. For details of Abbé de Saint-Pierre's proposal, see again Passami, especially chapters 4 through 8. And this is Rousseau's Pedide, volume 3, and gives the pages in the note. So, okay. In other words, the Abbé's situation of what he's doing here is he's not only, in other words, he's altering the system. He's trying to reform the monarchy. He's not maintaining a monarchy. He's changing the regime. He's proposing a change to the form of government from a monarchy to aristocracy in that sense. It remains for me to discuss the manners in which votes are cast and collected in the assembly of the people. But perhaps the history of Rome, of the Roman regulation in this regard, will explain more graphically all the maxims I could establish. In other words, so he's going to switch now to an example of Rome. And the rest of book 4, will focus on Roman examples. He will go into Roman history, going through all of them, right? So he will, in other words, but a history of the Roman regulations in this regard will explain more graphically all the maxims I could establish. In other words, he's going to use the examples of Rome because it's more graphic than the examples he could establish. It is not beneath the dignity of a judicial reader to consider in some detail how public and private affairs were handled in a council of 200,000 men. Okay, this is this very thing. This is a very large scale number. Some editors have not taken the sentence seriously, For example, Vaughan speaks of four of Book Four's chapters 4 through 7 as barely relevant to the subject and quite unworthy of the setting for which they are shaded. Volume 2, page 109. Descartes echoes the feeling, adding that for Rousseau, it is only a matter of filling up the fourth book. In other words, they don't take it seriously, even at the price of his digression, in order to be able to insert the chapter on civil religion, right? Um, these judgments ignore Rousseau's continued admiration for Rome and the motto of all free peoples. Discourse, see second discourse as dedication. Moreover, at least one internal reference suggests that these four chapters weren't inserted at the last minute. See Social Contract, editorial note 116, as well as Geneva Manuscript, editorial note 37. Finally, it must Finally, but most important of all, a comparison of Machiavelli's discourse of Titus Livy and Montesquieu's consideration of the greatness of the Romans or spirit of the laws shows very clearly the difference between Rousseau's view of Rome and that of his preceptors. In other words, what he will do here. In other words, if you've read Montesquieu's um, um, discourses on the greatness of Rome, right? That uh, 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 um, considerations on the greatness of Rome, or what Montesquieu says in his Spirit of Laws about the Romans, and what Machiavelli says in his discourses. You will see that there's differences. Rousseau does not. Rousseau does hear about these Roman things, points to the examples of the Roman model and how it fits, and his disagreements with the differences he has with both Montesquieu and Machiavelli here on this. So this is why many editors, many interpreters don't take this seriously. Master argues that we should take it seriously, what he will say in the next chapters. The next chapters are not just a digression, something added in that plays no relevance to it. It's very much. These are the examples. He's going to use the Roman as his examples to explain elections and how this works. And with that, I'm going to stop. We're probably at an hour and a half, I suspect. We're going to take questions. You put your questions in the thing there. Please put your questions in there. And I will, when I see them, I'll respond to them. If you have any issues or things or any points you want to ask about here, please put them below. Another thing you can do is if you like it, hit the like button, share it with a friend, share it with others, put it in social media, spread this out. Maybe people would be interested in this. Another thing, if you didn't like it, you can say no, you can thumbs down it, but you can say why. Say why in the notes. It's just because you can say like that, but say why so we can. If I made a mistake or you think I missaid something, say it in there so other people who watch this video will say. Of course, I will respond admit if I'm wrong here. I will defend myself or admit I'm wrong, but if others will learn from it. Okay, so therefore, this is why negatives are also not. You're gonna have criticism. Say it. Just punk it. Now, if you've not subscribed, subscribe. We've been having some ups and downs in this. The system is killing off old people who have just either left YouTube or have systems have closed down their accounts, or they're perceived as bots. Um, this is why I've never engaged a social media guy to kind of help me build my things. I suspect all these guys from what is that place? East Pakistan. East Pakistan. It's Bangladesh. All these Bangladeshis and Indians contacting me on something like LinkedIn. So I can help you to get your thing to. Okay, no, this is bots. They're using bots for the most part. They're creating bots to build you up. They and their friends use bots to get people on there who are not really interested, not organic growth, but I think what I'm doing here is some valuable. Maybe it isn't right now. Maybe you don't see it. I might have to repost stuff again, go through and go. Oh, I'm going to redo it again. Go through it like this. I don't know. I have to see what I have to do. I think people should be watching some of my old Aristotle stuff because they might be interested in it. More people should be looking at the Aristotle stuff. That's why I make the the groups that I did. So we'll see what happens. So therefore, you like it. You like it. Subscribe. Help grow the channel. You can follow me on social media. Links are below. You can follow me on academic social media to see my, want to see my scholarship. I do. The links are below those links. And if you want to help me to do what I do, you can become a member of Subscribestar on Patreon and become a supporter of the channel in that sense. And what I do, it'd be nice, it'd be useful. I know a lot of people don't do it, saying, "You why don't you do special things for us?" Well, I would do it if there was a big demand and people wanted it. The other thing is the links to my books. The way you can help is by buying one of my books. The books are listed below. Of course, there's a book on. I should do another one by soon of something. There. So again, this is Monday, Wednesday. Rousseau's are. We'll continue Rousseau on Monday, Wednesdays, and we'll be doing currently in this line. We're on Tuesday, Thursday, Schmidt. Okay, particularly Schmidt's dictatorship. With this, we say goodbye. Take care. Have a good day, and wish you a good one.